What's up, y'all? It's me, it's your boy, Mr. D, back at it again. Today, to talk to you about using quotations to help support your thesis statement. So, this PowerPoint assumes that you have watched the video or received instruction from your teacher about thesis statements. So, you know that you need a value judgment with a line of reasoning and you need to be beyond the text. So, let's say you have that ready. You have read a story. In this case, we're going to use the example of Shirley Jackson's, sorry, I don't know what that was, Shirley Jackson's story, The Lottery. Assume you have a thesis about that, and you've even got some quotations that you think are relevant to supporting that thesis. So we're not going to address finding those quotations, but we are going to address making those quotations matter. So your teacher should have told you at some point, hey, the structure of a paragraph is that you've got a thesis statement or a topic sentence that you're trying to prove, and you use evidence and commentary in order to do that. So evidence we kind of get, but what is commentary? Well, just like in Pokemon, there's one fundamental goal, which is gotta catch them all. Gotta catch them all, Pokemon. Anyway, we're just gonna move past that. Uh, well, luckily, there's only one goal of commentary. Okay, and some of you may have received instruction that says otherwise, but just moving forward, just know I want things to be super clear for you. And the one goal you need to focus on is explaining how and why the concrete detail helps to prove the thesis. That's it. It's just explaining why the evidence that you chose. So if you're writing one paragraph, you've got three quotations. Each time you write commentary, what you are doing is you're explaining what the heck that quotation has to do with your thesis. That's it. So if that's what you're doing, what you should be analyzing is why whatever's in the quotation helps prove the thesis statement. And what's in the quotation could be lots of different things. It could be the character's thoughts. Maybe you have a quotation where someone is thinking something in their head. Maybe you have a passage that talks about a character's feelings. Maybe you have a passage that talks about a character's actions, like what happens, what they do in the world, the choices they make, the consequences of their choices, their relationship with others, their experience of change. You can see where this is going. We are looking at what happens in the story and we're explaining why the heck it helps prove our thesis statement. Why does it help prove that something is good or bad for a certain reason? So, let me give you a weak example of commentary that is not going to be effective because instead of arguing why evidence is relevant, it merely summarizes the story. So, for context, hopefully you've read Shirley Jackson's The Lottery for this video to make sense. If you haven't, read it real quickly, it's not long. So, in Shirley Jackson's The Lottery, she reveals adhering to mindless traditions is dangerous. So, we've got our value judgment. You should not adhere to mindless traditions. And then we've got our line of reasoning because it prevents critical thinking. Okay, great. Well, if we have a CD here on the left, a piece of evidence, direct quotation, that says, and we have our lead in, for example, as the villagers gather around the black box to wait for the drawing to begin, then here's our quotation. Quote, they only half listened to the directions. Most of them were quiet, wetting their lips, not looking around. So, that is a quotation which shows us the effect of mindless traditions is that there's not much critical thinking going on. I mean, just look at the quotation. Before we write anything, just look at the quotation. They're only half listening, they're quiet, they're not examining their world, right? They're not looking around. So this quotation does support our thesis, but to write commentary is to explain that to the reader, right? And I mean, we're not explaining it out loud like I just did. You're going to have to write it down. But where a lot of students go wrong is they will give this quotation and then they will merely just describe what the quotation says. So that's what you get on the right here is weak plot summary. The villagers stand around waiting for the drawing to begin, acting passively. That's true. That is what happens. Who cares? Who cares? What does that have to do with your argument? They keep to themselves and wait to be told what to do. You know what I didn't see in that commentary? I didn't see the mindless traditions. I didn't see danger, and I didn't see a lack of critical thinking. At least that stuff isn't explained. We just have the plot summary that, hey, they stand around. Well, I know that already. I read the quotation. I don't need you to restate what the quotation said. I need you to tell me why it matters. Okay, so sad Pikachu down here in the bottom right corner for me. Now, good commentary, if we go back to all the way back here, is going to be explaining why the CD helps prove the thesis. And one way we express that is analyzing the significance of the quotation. And you might say, Mr. D, the significance In what sense? Well, the significance to your thesis, the relevance to your thesis. Okay, so once again, we have the same thesis, we have the same concrete detail, but what does better commentary look like? Well, better commentary is something like this. The villagers' lack of attention demonstrates, so what does it show? What does it prove? It demonstrates how their commitment to tradition keeps them docile and passive. So you see that language docile? Now I'm kind of going beyond just summary and I'm starting to characterize myself how they're acting. I'm adding something to the quotation. I'm saying, hey, these guys are docile and passive. And then I say, even though the villagers are uncomfortable, which by the way, that's me adding analysis here because nowhere in this quotation does it say they're uncomfortable. It gives you plot actions like wetting your lips or not looking around that indicate they're uncomfortable, but I'm unpacking that and saying even though the villagers are uncomfortable, they do not express or act on their discomfort as obedience has weakened their critical reasoning. So I'm starting to unpack in this commentary why it is relevant that these people are just standing there and not doing anything. I'm giving a framework through which we understand why that matters. And that matters because it is related to the thesis. It has to do with critical reasoning, which is a synonym of critical thinking. I'm bringing in the idea of tradition in my first sentence here to mirror what's happening here. Now, of course, that has to make sense. This concrete detail actually does have to be involving the tradition, which it is. If you've read the story, you know that the black box is central to the tradition. So that's why I get to bring in that language to my commentary. So let's do another one. Same thesis, so we're trying to prove the same thing, but now we have a new direct quotation we're going to use. Something like, in addition, while awaiting the quote winner, the children had stones already and someone gave little Davy Hutchison a few pebbles. Okay? What is it about this that makes it relevant to our thesis? Well, good commentary will explain that. So the townsfolk integrate Davy into the ritual from a young age, making this dangerous tradition seem normal. He and the other children readily join in the stoning, revealing how the tradition erodes critical thought. So we are doing the explanation for why it matters that there is a kid here, right? That's what the passage is about, right? If we wrote plot summary, we would say there are children at the tradition. Okay, who cares? Well, what that shows you is that by making the tradition something that applies to little kids who are not fully formed in their reasoning powers, then they never have a chance to use their critical thinking or their critical reasoning to investigate. Wait, should I be taking place in this at all? Is this a good idea? Hell no, we all know it's a weird and bad tradition, but the fact that there are kids there is what makes it possible for this tradition to be so dangerous because you can prevent critical thinking by getting people assimilated into the ritual quickly. And that is what this commentary explains a lot more succinctly than I just did. So, what I want you to notice about these effective instances of commentary is that you really have to make sure that the language of your thesis is appearing in your commentary. Because remember, the entire point of commentary is to explain the relationship of the evidence to the thesis. So, if you're doing that, I would expect your ideas of the thesis to be present in any commentary, right? Let's say I'm writing a paper and I want to prove that Chipotle is the best fast food. Well, I would expect to see in my commentary some stuff about Chipotle and some stuff about fast food. If I just said Chipotle has rice, Chipotle has beans, I'd just be summarizing. I wouldn't be connecting that back to being the best. Okay, and same thing here. So what are the things we need to connect back to in our example? Well, we need to connect back to adhering to mindless traditions being bad, right? There's some danger here, but like that's our take on it. But that's the topic is mindless traditions, and then we also need to be linking back to preventing critical thinking because that's the core of our line of reasoning. So those are the two things that I should see represented in the language of your commentary. And if we copy paste the example from here, you will see that I highlighted how that example uses language that is more or less reflective of the language of the thesis. So commitment to tradition is kind of the same idea as mindless traditions, or at least it's halfway there. And then weakening critical reasoning, preventing critical thinking, same thing. Well, the other strong CM example also did that. We talked about ritual, we talked about tradition, and then we talked about critical thought. So what I'm pointing out here is you don't necessarily at the end of every commentary need to have an official declaration and have like like in the medieval ages when they would have those trumpeters do 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 do. You don't need to have someone blow those horns and be like, I have proven my thesis. It's not the worst thing in the world if you do that, but like it does get clunky, it does get repetitive. What doesn't get clunky and repetitive is just asking yourself, can I point to the place in my commentary where I see the ideas of my thesis? Because that's what I'm trying to get back to. That's what I'm trying to support. So it'd be very weird if I was supporting an idea and I never mentioned it. That's a bad sign. So if you're watching this video after writing an essay and getting marks that say don't evidence doesn't support thesis or commentary insufficient or any of that stuff, you should be thinking to yourself, well, can I point to the place in my commentary where I am talking about the ideas in the thesis? That's the first step. Now, of course, the second step is does what you're saying actually make sense and match the book logically? But the first step is just having those ideas there. So always make sure that that is kind of a goal of yours when you're writing commentary. Okay. So I think this PowerPoint ends real quickly because this is just a quick hitter with one example from Shirley Jackson's The Lottery. You're going to practice this all the time if you want to become a great essay writer. You're going to be thinking about doing this for any passage that comes across class discussion in your notes. You should be taking the time to write a couple sentences of commentary for whatever thesis you think it would help support. Okay. So here's an example that you can do on your own, but I'm not going to provide you necessarily with the answer. This is just encouraging you to try for yourself and try to make sure you are doing the things that I've expressed in this video. So if you are going to do that, here's the thesis. Here's a new concrete detail, which you will need to create a lead in for. But the lottery was conducted, as were the square dances, the teenage club, the Halloween program, by Mr. Summers, who had the time and energy to devote to civic activities. And you should be thinking to yourself, okay, like what about this quotation helps show that there's a lack of critical thinking or a mindlessness to these traditions and how they operate? And for your commentary, you would write two sentences that explain why this is relevant, and then you would highlight, as I did on the previous slide, the phrases that reflect the ideas of mindless traditions and lack of critical thinking. Okay, so that's what you would do to practice, but hopefully this quick example has given you an overview of how you should be thinking about commentary, and of course, commentary always looks different based on the thesis you're trying to prove. But these are kind of the fundamental ways to think about commentary. Thanks for your time, and I'll see you in the next video.